Ambassador James Walker stepped off the transport shuttle and onto the massive Galactic Council station, carrying nothing but a scuffed leather briefcase that had seen better days. The thing was held together with duct tape on one corner, which seemed almost insulting given the opulence surrounding him. Crystal spires stretched overhead, holographic displays floated everywhere, and the polished floors reflected lights from 1,000 different worlds. James looked completely out of place. At 52 years old, he had more gray hair than brown, wire-rimmed reading glasses that kept sliding down his nose, and a suit that was clean but clearly off the rack. He could have been anyone's uncle who worked in middle management, the kind of guy you'd see at a barbecue talking about his lawn care routine. Nothing about him screamed, Galactic Diplomat. Nothing about him screamed much of anything, really. The council chamber was enormous, designed to accommodate species of wildly different sizes and environmental needs. Methane breathers sat in sealed pods. Crystalline beings refracted light from their designated zones. And dominating the center of it all were the Vrexians. They were impossible to miss. Standing anywhere from 7 to 8 feet tall, the Vrexian delegates looked like someone had taken a dinosaur, given it obsidian black scales, added way too many teeth, and then taught it to wear ceremonial armor. Their leader, a battle-scarred warrior named Cratch, practically radiated menace. Scars crisscrossed his snout, and one of his eyes had been replaced with a glowing red cybernetic implant that tracked movement with predatory focus. James found his assigned seat, which was comically small compared to the Vrexian platforms. He set down his briefcase, pulled out a yellow legal pad, actual paper, which drew confused looks from several delegates who hadn't seen the stuff in decades, and waited for the session to begin. The trade negotiation started simply enough. Earth wanted fair access to the jump gate network that connected the major systems. Standard stuff. New species paid a fee, got their access codes, everyone went home happy. But then the Vrexian ambassador stood, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop. The human petition is denied, Cratch announced, his voice like gravel in a blender. However, we offer alternative terms. Earth will grant the Vrexian Empire exclusive mining rights to your outer colonies, the ones you call the Frost Belt. In exchange, we will allow limited human access to secondary trade routes. James looked up from his notes. I'm sorry, could you clarify? The Frost Belt contains 17 inhabited settlements. About 40,000 people live there. They will be relocated, Cratch said dismissively. The mineral deposits are valuable. Your people can find other rocks to live on. Several delegates shifted uncomfortably, but nobody spoke up. The Vrexian Empire had a reputation. They glassed 3 planets in the last century for defying their trade edicts. Most species had learned that arguing with them was bad for your planet's health. James cleaned his glasses with his tie, a nervous habit that made him look even more harmless. I appreciate the offer, but I'll have to decline. Those settlements include families, schools, whole communities. We can't just uproot 40,000 people because the rent's better somewhere else. The chamber went quiet. You could have heard a pin drop, if pins made any sound in the recycled atmosphere. Cratch's cybernetic eye focused on James with laser intensity. You decline? Yes, sir. Respectfully, I decline. James made a note on his legal pad. Earth is willing to pay standard gate fees, same as any other species. We're also open to discussing mutually beneficial trade agreements. But we can't agree to terms that would displace our citizens. For a moment, Cratch just stared. Then he laughed. It started as a low rumble and built into a booming sound that echoed off the crystal walls. Other Vrexian delegates joined in, their laughter sounding disturbingly like growling. The human squeaks. Cratch bellowed, addressing the entire assembly now. Look at this creature. Your species has been crawling around space for what, 90 years? 100? You have no fleet worth mentioning. You've conquered no worlds. You've won no wars. You have nothing except the one little planet you hatched on and a handful of ice rocks you call colonies. He leaned forward, his massive frame towering even from across the chamber. You exist in this galaxy because we allow it. You trade because we permit it. And you will accept our terms because the alternative is that your species stops existing altogether. Do you understand me, human? The other delegates looked away. Some studied their datapads with sudden intense interest. Others found the ceiling fascinating. This was how things worked in galactic politics. The strong dictated terms. The weak accepted them. Everybody understood their place in the food chain. James sat quietly through the tirade. He didn't argue or protest. He just listened, his face neutral, his hands folded on top of his legal pad. When Cratch finally finished, James nodded slowly. I understand your position, he said, his voice still calm and measured. However, I'll need to consult with my government before agreeing to any terms. I propose we reconvene tomorrow morning. That should give everyone time to consider alternative solutions that might work for all parties. Cratch's cybernetic eye flared brighter. There are no alternatives. There is only submission or annihilation. James stood, picking up his briefcase and legal pad. Then I guess we'll have a lot to discuss tomorrow. Thank you for your time, Counselor Cratch. I look forward to continuing these negotiations in a productive manner. Coward, Cratch spat. James paused at the doorway but didn't turn around. For just a second, something changed in his posture, a subtle shift that was gone almost before it registered. Then he continued walking, his footsteps echoing in the sudden, tense silence of the chamber. As the door closed behind him, Cratch turned to his fellow Vrexians. Did you see that? The human trembles at the sound of my voice. Tomorrow he will sign our terms and thank us for the privilege. But one of the older delegates, a being made of crystalline thought patterns, wasn't so sure. It had noticed that momentary shift in the human's posture. That brief instant where Ambassador James Walker had looked less like someone's harmless uncle and more like something else entirely. Something dangerous. The diplomatic quarter of the station operated on a universal day-night cycle to accommodate species that needed sleep. During night hours, the lights dimmed to a soft blue glow, and the usual bustle of activity faded to near silence. James walked alone through the corridors, his briefcase swinging slightly with each step, still reviewing his notes from the disastrous negotiation session. He was thinking about how to explain this mess to the folks back home when he heard the footsteps. Heavy ones. Multiple sets. The kind that weren't trying very hard to be quiet. 3 Vrexian warriors emerged from a side corridor ahead, blocking his path completely. They weren't wearing the ceremonial armor from the council chambers. This was combat gear, matte black and designed for function over form. Each warrior stood over 7 feet tall, their obsidian scales seeming to absorb the dim lighting. Their clawed hands flexed slowly, deliberately, like they were warming up for something. James stopped walking. He recognized a tactical situation when he saw one. Behind him, he heard 2 more sets of footsteps approaching from the direction he'd come. They'd boxed him in pretty efficiently. Professional work, really. The lead warrior in front stepped forward. His scales had a bronze tint that marked him as a mid-ranking officer. Ambassador Walker. How fortunate to run into you during your evening walk. Is it? James asked mildly, though his eyes were tracking all 5 warriors now, calculating distances and angles out of pure habit. Seems like a lot of you just happen to be taking the same walk at the same time. The war chief Cratch sends his regards. Bronze Scales continued, cracking his knuckles one by one. The sound echoed off the metal walls like gunshots. He believes you may have misunderstood the gravity of this afternoon's discussion. We are here to provide clarity. That's thoughtful of him. James shifted his briefcase to his left hand. Though I'm pretty clear on where things stand. Big strong empire wants to push around the new species. Tale as old as time, really? One of the warriors behind him growled. Actually growled like an animal. You will show respect, human. I show respect to people who earn it, James replied, his voice still conversational. Jumping diplomats in hallways doesn't really qualify. Bronze Scales smiled, revealing rows of serrated teeth. Here's what will happen. You will kneel. You will activate your communication device. And you will record a message to your pathetic little planet, apologizing for your rudeness and announcing that Earth accepts all Vrexian terms without modification. Then, if you beg nicely, we may let you leave with only minor injuries. The corridor was empty except for them. The security cameras were there, James noticed, but he also noticed the small jamming device clipped to Bronze Scales' belt. Clever. Whatever happened next wouldn't be officially recorded. Just another unfortunate accident in an isolated corridor. James set his briefcase down carefully against the wall. He straightened his tie, rolled his shoulders once, and looked at each warrior in turn. When he spoke, his voice had changed. The mild-mannered diplomat was gone. What remained was something colder, flatter. Something that had seen too much and done worse. I'm going to give you one chance, he said quietly. Walk away. Report back to Cratch that you couldn't find me. Tell him I was in my quarters or talking to other delegates or literally anything else. Just turn around and leave. Please. They laughed. All 5 of them, that same growling laughter he'd heard in the council chamber. The human begs now, one of them said. Perhaps we'll. He never finished the sentence. James moved. Later, when security analysts would review what the cameras caught before the jamming kicked in, they'd argue about what they'd seen. Some said it was impossible. Others insisted the footage must have been doctored. But the timestamps didn't lie, and neither did the biometric sensors. 14 seconds. That's how long it took. The first warrior, the one who'd been speaking, lunged at James with claws extended. James stepped inside his reach, caught the extended arm, and used the warrior's own momentum to drive him face-first into the wall with a sickening crunch. The arm bent at an angle that arms weren't supposed to bend. The warrior dropped, howling in pain. The second came from behind, fast and coordinated. James spun, his elbow catching the warrior square in the throat. As the Vrexian staggered back, gasping, James swept his legs out from under him. The warrior's head bounced off the floor hard enough to dent the metal plating. Bronze Scales and his remaining companion rushed James together, trying to use their size advantage. It didn't work. James ducked under Bronze Scales' haymaker punch, came up inside his guard, and delivered 3 rapid strikes to pressure points that humans shouldn't have known Vrexians even had. Bronze Scales' legs buckled. The fourth warrior managed to land a glancing blow to James's shoulder that would have shattered a normal human's collarbone. James barely flinched. He caught the warrior's arm, twisted, and the satisfying crack of breaking bone echoed through the corridor. The fifth and final warrior, the one from behind who'd been approaching for a second attack, froze. He just watched a middle-aged human in a rumpled suit dismantle 4 trained Vrexian shock troops in less time than it took to brew a cup of coffee. His survival instincts finally kicked in, screaming at him to run. He ran. James let him go. He stood there for a moment, breathing normally, his suit barely wrinkled. His glasses had been knocked askew, so he adjusted them carefully. 4 Vrexian warriors lay groaning on the floor around him. And here was the thing that would later terrify everyone who reviewed the footage. James had been holding back. Security specialists would count 17 different moments where James could have delivered killing blows. 17 times his hands had been positioned perfectly to break necks, crush windpipes, or rupture vital organs. And 17 times he'd pulled back at the last possible instant, choosing to disable rather than kill. That kind of control didn't come from training. It came from experience. Lots and lots of experience. James picked up his briefcase, checked it for damage, and continued down the corridor. He stepped over Bronze Scales without looking down, his footsteps steady and unhurried. Behind him, the jamming device finally died, its battery drained. The security cameras flickered back to life, capturing 4 incapacitated Vrexian warriors and 1 very confused security patrol that arrived 30 seconds too late. In his quarters, James made himself a cup of tea, took out his legal pad, and continued preparing for tomorrow's negotiations. His hands were perfectly steady as he wrote. No shaking, no adrenaline crash, nothing to suggest he'd just been in a fight. Just another evening for Ambassador James Walker. But somewhere in the station's security office, alarms were starting to sound, and people were beginning to ask very serious questions about exactly who Earth had sent to represent them at the Galactic Council. The emergency council session was called for dawn, which in station time meant 0600 hours. The chamber filled quickly, delegates arriving in various states of alert and confusion. Nobody had slept well after word spread about the incident in the diplomatic quarter. 4 Vrexian warriors in medical bay. 1 human diplomat completely unharmed. The math didn't add up, and that made people nervous. Cratch arrived with a full security detail, his cybernetic eye glowing brighter than usual. He looked like he wanted to tear someone apart, preferably the human ambassador. But James wasn't there yet. His seat sat empty, that same comically small chair that had seemed almost insulting yesterday. The council mediator, a floating gaseous being named Welrose, called the session to order. We are here to address the assault on Ambassador Walker in Corridor 7 Delta at approximately 2100 hours station time. Initial security reports indicate. Reports indicate nothing, Cratch interrupted, slamming his fist on his platform. My warriors were conducting a routine patrol when they were viciously attacked by the human. This is clearly an act of aggression against the Vrexian Empire. We demand the human be arrested immediately and handed over for justice. Murmurs rippled through the assembly. Several delegates who'd been ready to condemn the Vrexians suddenly looked uncertain. Cratch was many things, but he wasn't stupid. He'd gotten his story in first, and in politics, that often mattered more than the truth. The chamber doors opened. But it wasn't James who entered. It was a woman in her early 60s, wearing a perfectly tailored gray suit and carrying herself with the kind of authority that made people sit up straighter without meaning to. Her silver hair was pulled back in a tight bun, and her eyes swept the room with the calculating gaze of someone who'd spent decades navigating political minefields. Ambassador Patricia Hayes, Welrose announced, sounding relieved. Earth's senior diplomatic representative. Thank you for coming on such short notice. Patricia walked to the human delegation platform without hurrying, set down a secured datapad and addressed the council. Thank you, Mediator Welrose. I apologize for Ambassador Walker's absence. He's currently filing formal assault charges with station security and didn't want those proceedings to delay this important session. Cratch's eye flared. He dares? He dares to follow proper legal procedures after being jumped by 5 armed warriors in an isolated corridor, yes. Patricia's voice could have cut glass. The security footage is quite clear on what happened, despite someone's attempt to jam the cameras. She activated her datapad and holographic displays materialized above the council floor. Frame-by-frame footage from before the jamming device activated. 5 Vrexian warriors in combat gear, moving to intercept a lone diplomat. The tactical formation. The deliberate positioning. Now, Patricia continued, I understand there are questions about how Ambassador Walker was able to defend himself so effectively. The Council has requested information about his background. I've been authorized by Earth's government to share certain details, though much of his file remains classified for security reasons. She pressed another control and a new image appeared. A younger James Walker, maybe 30 years old, wearing tactical gear that had seen serious use. Body armor scarred with blast marks. A rifle held with the easy familiarity of someone who'd carried one for years. But it was his eyes that drew attention. They were different than the mild, friendly eyes the Council had seen yesterday. These eyes were hard, cold, and had seen things that left permanent marks. Before he became a diplomat, Patricia said, James Walker served in Earth's Special Operations Command for 23 years. His operational call sign was Reaper 6. The name meant nothing to most of the delegates, but a few of the older species representatives stiffened. They'd heard rumors about Earth's Special Operations units. Whispers about humans who operated in the shadows, doing the kind of work that governments never officially acknowledged. Patricia pulled up another file. I'll share some of his unclassified mission history. In 2241, the Meridian conflict threatened to destabilize an entire sector. 3 separate factions were racing to acquire nuclear weapons. The situation was deemed unsolvable without massive military intervention. Walker inserted alone into the most heavily fortified position in the region, extracted the warlord orchestrating the arms race, and delivered him to international authorities. He accomplished this by penetrating a fortress defended by 5,000 troops. Alone. In 48 hours. The chamber was silent now. Even Cratch had stopped posturing. In 2245, the Singapore crisis. A terrorist cell had seized control of a civilian station with 12,000 inhabitants. They had deadman switches rigged to explosives throughout the structure. Any conventional rescue attempt would have triggered a massacre. Walker went in alone, neutralized the entire cell in under 48 hours, and didn't trigger a single explosive. All 12,000 civilians survived. Patricia scrolled through more files. The Titan extraction. The Ganymede incident. The thing we only call Operation Blackout because even the name is classified. Over the course of his career, Walker completed 73 missions. 73 operations that were considered impossible until he proved otherwise. His confirmed mission success rate is 100%. She paused, letting that sink in. His confirmed kill count is classified, but based on declassified after-action reports, conservative estimates place it in the hundreds. Possibly over 1,000. We genuinely don't know the exact number because some of his operations are so sensitive that even the casualty reports remain sealed. One of the smaller delegates, an insectoid being from a peaceful trade confederation, raised a trembling appendage. Why? Why would you send such a person as a diplomat? Isn't that like sending a predator to negotiate peace? Patricia's expression softened slightly. That's exactly why we sent him. 8 years ago, Walker retired from active service. He'd completed his final mission, something in the outer territories that I'm not cleared to discuss, and he requested reassignment. Specifically, he requested diplomatic training. When asked why, he said, and I'm quoting directly from his personnel file, I've caused enough death for one lifetime. I'd like to try saving lives instead. She pulled up more recent photos. James at diplomatic functions, always slightly uncomfortable in formal settings. James volunteering at a refugee center on Earth. James teaching conflict resolution at the academy. He spent 3 years in diplomatic training, Patricia continued. He could have had any assignment he wanted. Combat instructor. Security consultant. Tactical advisor. Instead he chose this. He chose to sit in rooms and talk instead of fight. Earth's government trusted that he meant it. That someone who'd seen that much violence would be the last person to want more of it. Cratch finally found his voice. This is propaganda. No single being could accomplish what you claim. You're trying to intimidate this council with human fairy tales. Patricia smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Station security pulled the complete footage from last night's assault. The cameras captured the first 3 seconds before your jamming device activated. Would you like me to show it? She didn't wait for an answer. The hologram shifted, showing James in the corridor. Showing the first warrior lunging. Then showing what happened next in excruciating slow-motion detail. The precision. The efficiency. The absolute control. 17, Patricia said quietly. Our analysts counted 17 different moments where Ambassador Walker could have used lethal force. 17 times his hands were positioned for killing strikes. And 17 times he pulled back and chose disabling techniques instead. That's not luck. That's not adrenaline. That's decades of experience making split-second choices about who lives and who dies. She turned to face Cratch directly. So yes, Counselor. Earth sent one of our most dangerous individuals to represent us. And the fact that he chose non-lethal responses when your warriors tried to murder him should terrify you more than any threat ever could. Because it means he's exactly what we said he is. Someone who's seen enough violence to know it should be the absolute last resort. The council chamber remained silent for a long moment. Finally, Welrose spoke, his gaseous form swirling with obvious agitation. This session is adjourned pending further investigation. All parties will refrain from further contact until... The doors opened again. James walked in carrying his briefcase, looking exactly like he had yesterday. Mild, rumpled, harmless. He found his seat and sat down. Sorry I'm late, he said pleasantly. Paperwork took longer than expected. Are we ready to continue negotiations? Cratch left the emergency council session in a rage that his entire delegation could feel radiating off him like heat from a furnace. He'd been humiliated twice now. First by a human who'd refused to show proper fear, and then by having his warriors beaten so badly they were still in medical bay whimpering about broken bones. The Vrexian Empire did not tolerate humiliation. More importantly, Cratch personally did not tolerate it. In his private quarters he assembled his most trusted officers. These weren't the regular soldiers he'd sent before. These were his personal guard, the elite shock troops who'd helped him conquer 4 worlds and crush a dozen rebellions. 12 of them stood at attention, each one a veteran of countless battles. The human has made fools of us, Cratch said, pacing like a caged predator. He disrespects our empire, refuses our generous terms, and then has the audacity to defend himself when we try to teach him humility. This cannot stand. His second-in-command, a scarred veteran named Drothar, shifted his weight. Commander, the council is watching now. If we move against the human again there will be consequences. Only if they can prove it was us, Cratch replied. The human stays in quarters 7 to 142. Standard diplomat housing. Minimal security. At 0300 hours, you will enter his room and eliminate him. Make it look like a malfunction with the life support systems. An unfortunate accident. These things happen on old stations. One of the younger warriors raised a clawed hand. Commander, the intelligence briefing said this human has significant combat experience. Should we? I don't care if he was a warrior on his primitive little planet, Cratch snapped. He's one aging human. You are 12 of the finest soldiers the Vrexian Empire has ever produced. If you cannot handle one diplomat in his sleep, then you deserve whatever fate finds you. The warriors saluted and departed to prepare. Cratch watched them go, his cybernetic eye glowing with satisfaction. By morning the human problem would be solved, Earth would accept Vrexian terms out of fear, and order would be restored. He had no idea how wrong he was. At 0300 hours, James was still awake in his quarters, sitting at a small desk reviewing files on his datapad. He'd changed out of his suit into comfortable civilian clothes, just a plain t-shirt and pants. His quarters were modest, standard diplomatic housing with a bedroom, small living area, and basic bathroom facilities. Nothing fancy but functional. He heard them coming 2 full minutes before they reached his door. The faint vibration of heavy footsteps through the station's infrastructure. 12 sets, moving in tactical formation, trying to be quiet but not quite managing it. James set down his datapad and sighed. Really should have taken the hint, he muttered to himself. He stood, stretched, and looked around his quarters. The desk was solid metal, bolted to the floor but with some give if you knew where to apply pressure. The chairs were standard issue, lightweight aluminum frames. His briefcase sat by the door, reinforced polymer shell with titanium clasps. Not ideal weapons, but he'd worked with worse. The door's security panel began to glow as someone on the other side started cutting through the lock with a plasma torch. Professional work, quiet and efficient. These weren't the same thugs from the hallway. These were trained operators. James positioned himself where he'd have the best angles when they came through. He picked up a reading lamp from the desk, tested its weight, and nodded to himself. Then he waited. The door slid open with a soft hiss. 12 Vrexian shock troops poured in with weapons raised, night vision gear activated, moving like they'd rehearsed this 1,000 times. They probably had. The room was dark, and they expected to find a sleeping diplomat an easy target. Instead, they found James standing in the center of the room, clearly visible even in the dim emergency lighting. "Evening, gentlemen," he said calmly. "I was really hoping we wouldn't have to do this." The lead warrior barked an order in the Vrexian language. James understood it perfectly. He'd learned their tongue during the 3-day flight to the station, but he didn't bother acknowledging it. He just moved. What happened next would later be described by the security chief as the most efficient display of close-quarters combat she'd ever witnessed. The quarters were small, which should have been an advantage for the attackers. 12 against 1 in a confined space usually meant the one didn't stand a chance. But James had spent 23 years fighting in places exactly like this. Tight corridors on ships. Small rooms and stations. Urban environments where there was never enough space and always too many enemies. The confined quarters weren't a disadvantage. They were his home field. The first warrior through the door caught the desk lamp across his jaw, the metal base connecting with enough force to crack bone. He dropped instantly. James was already moving, using the falling body as a shield against the second warrior's grab. He twisted, redirected the momentum, and sent the second warrior crashing into the third. His briefcase became a weapon, the reinforced edges catching pressure points and vulnerable joints. A chair leg, torn free with one sharp pull, worked perfectly for disarming the warrior trying to bring a weapon to bear. Every movement was economical, precise, with zero wasted energy. The warriors tried to coordinate, to use their numerical advantage, but the small room betrayed them. They got in each other's way, blocked each other's lines of attack, created opportunities that James exploited ruthlessly. He flowed through them like water, always where they didn't expect, hitting from angles they couldn't defend. 4 minutes. That's all it took. When station security finally cut through the door, someone had triggered an alarm when the original lock was breached. They found a scene that would be analyzed in tactical training courses for years afterward. 12 elite Vrexian shock troops lay groaning on the floor, all incapacitated with non-lethal but extremely effective injuries. Broken bones, dislocated joints, concussions that would take weeks to heal. And in the middle of it all sat James Walker, back at his desk, drinking a cup of tea he'd somehow found time to make during the fight. His quarters were trashed, furniture broken and scattered everywhere, but James himself had barely a scratch on him. His reading glasses were cracked though, which seemed to annoy him more than the assassination attempt. Security Chief Torvas, a 4-armed veteran who'd seen combat on a dozen worlds, stood in the doorway and just stared. Her tactical mind was trying to process what she was seeing and failing completely. "Ambassador Walker," she finally managed. "What? How?" James looked up, noticed his tea had gotten cold during the interruption, and frowned slightly. "Evening, Chief Torvas. Sorry about the mess. I'd like to file a formal complaint about the disruption. I have important negotiations in the morning and really needed a good night's sleep." James stood, picked up his cracked glasses, and examined them with genuine disappointment. "Practice, Chief. Too much practice." He looked at her directly, and for just a moment she saw something in his eyes that made her take an involuntary step back. Something cold and ancient and very, very tired. "I spent 23 years learning how to hurt people efficiently. The skills don't really go away no matter how much you wish they would." Then he blinked and the moment passed. He was just a middle-aged diplomat again, worried about his broken glasses and cold tea. "I assume this was Cratch's doing," James said. 12 warriors don't just accidentally wander into a diplomat's quarters with weapons at 3 in the morning. "We'll be conducting a full investigation," Torvas assured him. "Good. Make sure the council sees the full report." James gathered his datapad and what remained of his belongings. "I'll need to request new quarters, I suppose. These are a bit drafty now with the door cut open." As he walked out, stepping carefully over groaning Vrexian warriors, James paused and looked back at Torvas. "Chief? For what it's worth, I really didn't want to hurt them. But they didn't leave me much choice. Torvas believed him. That was somehow the most terrifying part of all. The full Galactic Council convened in emergency session 12 hours after the assassination attempt. Every delegate was present, which almost never happened. The chamber buzzed with nervous energy as species from across the galaxy tried to process what they'd learned over the past 2 days. This wasn't just about trade negotiations anymore. This was about something much bigger, much more frightening. Security Chief Torvas presented her findings with clinical precision. Video footage, medical reports, forensic analysis of James's quarters. The evidence was overwhelming and irrefutable. Cratch had ordered a hit on a diplomatic representative, violating about 17 different galactic treaties in the process. But that wasn't what had everyone on edge. What terrified them was the combat footage. Torvas had included clips from both incidents, the hallway confrontation and the quarters assault. 17 warriors total, all elite combatants, all neutralized by one middle-aged human who looked like he should be teaching high school math or fixing lawn mowers on weekends. The analyst had slowed down the footage, breaking down every movement, and that somehow made it worse. Because in slow motion you could see the control, the precision. The way James had positioned his strikes to disable rather than kill, even when lethal force would have been easier and legally justified. "We need to understand something," said Counselor Venn, a crystalline being whose species had been spacefaring for over 10,000 years. Her voice resonated through the chamber with genuine concern. If humans send individuals like Ambassador Walker as diplomats, what do they send as soldiers? The question hung in the air like smoke. Every delegate was thinking it, but Venn had been brave enough, or worried enough, to say it out loud. Ambassador Patricia Hayes stood to respond, but James touched her arm gently. She looked at him, surprised, then nodded and sat back down. James rose from his comically small chair, and the entire chamber focused on him. He still looked rumpled, still had those cracked reading glasses, still carried that taped-up briefcase. But nobody was laughing anymore. "Counselor Venn, with respect, you've got it backwards," James said, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber without him having to raise it. "Earth doesn't send warriors to become diplomats. We send people who've seen enough war to understand why it should be the absolute last option, not the first one we reach for." He walked to the center of the floor where everyone could see him clearly. "Yes, I know how to fight. I'm good at it, better than I ever wanted to be. I spent 23 years learning how to hurt people, how to break things, how to solve problems with violence. And you know what that taught me? That violence is the worst possible solution to almost every problem. It's expensive, it's messy, it creates more problems than it solves, and it leaves scars that never really heal." James turned slowly, making eye contact with delegates around the chamber. "I've killed people. A lot of people. I did it because my government asked me to, because I thought it was necessary, because sometimes in the moment it was the only choice that kept innocent people alive. Every single one of those deaths is in here." He tapped his temple. "I see their faces when I close my eyes. I remember their last moments. And I carry that weight every single day." The chamber was absolutely silent now. Even Cratch, sitting with his security detail and looking smaller than he had 2 days ago, seemed to be actually listening. 17 warriors attacked me over 2 separate incidents," James continued. 5 in a hallway, 12 in my quarters. I could have killed every single one of them. It would have been easier, honestly. Lethal strikes are simpler than controlled ones. But I didn't do it because those warriors were following orders they thought were honorable. They were doing what their commander told them to do. Their deaths wouldn't have solved anything. They wouldn't have made the galaxy safer or brought justice or accomplished anything except adding 17 more faces to my nightmares. He looked directly at Cratch now. "Your warriors are alive, Counselor. Injured, sure. They'll need time to heal. But they'll go home to their families. They'll have another chance to be better than they were. I gave them that choice because I've taken that choice away from too many people already, and I won't add to that number unless there's absolutely no other option." James pulled out his datapad, the same yellow legal pad he'd been using since he arrived. "Earth's position hasn't changed. We want fair access to the Jump Gate network. We're willing to pay standard fees, same as any other species. We're open to trade agreements that benefit everyone involved. What we won't do is give up our colonies, displace our citizens, or accept terms that treat us like we're worth less than anyone else here." He set the datapad down on the Vrexian platform right in front of Cratch. "These are our proposed terms. Fair trade, mutual respect, open communication channels. If the Vrexian Empire can agree to these terms, we can build something better than what we've had the past few days. If not, we'll find other partners and other routes. Earth isn't going to be bullied, but we're also not looking for a fight." Cratch stared at the datapad like it might explode. His cybernetic eye flickered erratically. Finally, in a voice much quieter than anyone had heard from him before, he asked, "And if we refuse? If the Vrexian Empire decides that humanity needs to be taught a lesson?" James was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, there was no threat in his voice, no bravado. Just a simple statement of fact. "Then you'll learn the same thing 17 of your warriors just learned. That humans are really, really good at surviving things that should kill us. And that when we do fight, we fight with everything we have. I'm one diplomat, counselor. Earth has billions of people, and a lot of them have military training. The question you need to ask yourself is whether you want to find out what happens when you make all of us choose violence instead of peace." The chamber erupted in whispered conversations. Delegates conferred with their advisors, checked their datapads, calculated probabilities. The political landscape had shifted dramatically in just 72 hours. Mediator Welrose called for order. "The Council will vote on the human petition for standard jump gate access and the proposed sanctions against the Vrexian Empire for violations of diplomatic protocols. All in favor?" The vote wasn't even close. 37 species voted to grant Earth full standard access to the jump gate network. 41 voted to sanction the Vrexian Empire, including several of Cratch's traditional allies who decided that backing him wasn't worth the risk anymore. Cratch sat frozen as the votes were tallied. His empire had just been humiliated on the galactic stage, and there was nothing he could do about it. Finally, with visible effort, he stood and faced James directly. "The Vrexian Empire accepts Earth's terms," he said, each word sounding like it physically hurt, "and offers formal apologies for the incidents involving Ambassador Walker." James nodded. "Apology accepted, counselor. I hope this can be the start of a better relationship between our peoples." Cratch didn't respond. He simply gathered his delegation and left, his warriors following behind like a funeral procession. Everyone in the chamber knew he'd be recalled to his homeworld. Commanders who failed this spectacularly didn't keep their positions. As the session broke up and delegates began filing out, a young representative from the Talarian Commonwealth approached James nervously. She was barely into adulthood by her species standards, new to galactic politics and still idealistic about how things should work. "Ambassador Walker?" she asked, her voice tentative. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course," James said, giving her his full attention in that way that made people feel heard. "Why didn't you kill them? After everything they did, you would have been completely justified. Everyone would have understood. Why show mercy to people who tried to murder you?" James was quiet for a moment, looking out through the massive viewport at the stars beyond. "Because that's the old me," he finally said. The version of James Walker who solved problems by being better at violence than the other guy. "I spent 2 decades being that person, and you know what? I was good at it. Really good. But I wasn't happy. I wasn't proud of what I'd become." He turned back to her. "I'm trying to be someone different now. Someone who proves that the strongest choice isn't always the violent one. Someone who shows that humans can be more than just efficient killers. We can be builders, creators, peacekeepers. We can choose to save lives instead of taking them." The young delegate smiled. That's really admirable." "It's survival," James corrected gently. "If humanity wants to be part of this galactic community, we need to prove we're worth having around. That we can contribute something besides fear. Because fear only works until someone stops being afraid. Then you've got nothing left." He gathered his briefcase and datapad. "Besides, I meant what I said in there. I've taken enough lives to fill my nightmares for 3 lifetimes. I won't add to that count unless there's absolutely no other choice. Those warriors get to go home. They get another chance to be better. And maybe, just maybe, some of them will think about that human diplomat who spared them when he didn't have to, and they'll make a different choice next time someone tells them to hurt people." As James walked toward the exit, Patricia fell into step beside him. "That was good work in there. Earth's proud of you." "Thanks," James said. "Though I could have done without the whole assassination attempt part. These were my favorite glasses." He held up the cracked frames ruefully. Patricia laughed. "We'll get you new ones. Come on, let's get you settled into your new quarters. Actual diplomatic housing this time with proper security. Security that can keep out Vrexian shock troops? Security that will give you advance warning if Vrexian shock troops try anything. We both know you don't actually need help with the rest." James smiled at that, and together they walked out of the council chamber. Behind them, the Galactic Council began the work of adjusting to a new reality, one where humanity had proven they deserved a seat at the table, not through conquest or threats, but through the simple demonstration that their diplomats chose peace even when war would have been easier. The galaxy had learned an important lesson. Humanity sent their most dangerous people as ambassadors for peace, trusting them to choose words over weapons. And that restraint, that conscious choice to be better than they could have been, was more powerful than any show of force ever could be. Retry.